What is currently above you, fans of movies? See, my normal opening is getting a bit boring at this point, so I had to switch it up a little bit, so... yeah. Let's go on now. I decided that I'm going to do a bit of a different video. It's not going to be ranking anything. It's not technically going to be a review of a standalone movie. It's actually going to be a review of a full trilogy, the Dark Knight trilogy. This is a trilogy about Batman. A lot of people say the first two movies in the trilogy, Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, are the two best Batman movies. I do think that this is probably the best adaptation in terms of movies of Batman. I had to specify that it's in terms of movies because Batman the Animated Series exists and people are going to say that that's the best, but I haven't actually seen that, so... The Dark Knight trilogy. Okay, this trilogy, I think, is a really, really good trilogy, and I just wanted to share my thoughts on it because why not? Because I think it's a brilliant trilogy. So, I'm going to kind of be reviewing each movie in it, just like a quick little my thoughts on it. First off, Batman Begins. I think that this movie is a great origin story for Batman, and it probably handles the origin story better than most origin story movies that I've seen. This movie's first act had to tell a lot of story. It had to tell everything up from young Bruce falling into the Batcave all the way up to Bruce as an adult training with Ra's al Ghul. They had to tell a lot there, and they do it by, in the entire first act of the movie, Bruce training with Ra's al Ghul, while also through flashbacks telling the entire story of him falling into the Batcave and his parents getting killed. They tell that entire story through flashbacks and through just what's actually happening. And I think that that was a really good way of handling it, because I don't think it would have worked any other way. So I think that they handled the origin story at the beginning very, very well. After that, they go into the city, and he starts to actually become Batman, and I just think that they handled the whole thing really well, showing his motivations clearly. They established that he doesn't want to kill anyone clearly, which is a big thing throughout this entire trilogy, and they just establish everything that you need to know about Bruce Wayne in the first act of this movie, and I think that they did that perfectly. We move into the second act. I want to talk about the villains real quick in this movie. So the two main villains, each movie in this trilogy kind of has two main villains. In this movie, it's Ra's al Ghul and the Scarecrow. One of them I think is really, really good. The other one I think is really average. The one that I think is really average, and this is kind of why I wanted to talk about villains now, is the Scarecrow. He's my least favorite villain in this entire trilogy, because in this entire trilogy, it seems like all of the villains have clear motivations, distinct personalities and everything. The Scarecrow doesn't really have motivations. He's just kind of evil because they needed a villain for the second act because they couldn't have Ra's al Ghul there yet. So I don't really like the Scarecrow in this movie. As for Ra's al Ghul, I think that he is a great villain, and, well, he is the main villain, so that makes sense, but they show the difference between him and Bruce very, very well, and they don't even tell you that he's actually Ra's al Ghul until you get to the third act, and I think that that reveal was done really well. I just overall think that a lot of things in this movie were done very, very well, and so this trilogy did get off to a great start, and I really liked Batman Begins. The real reason that I'm talking about this trilogy is because of the second movie in the trilogy, The Dark Knight, which a lot of people say is the best Batman movie ever. I'm just going to be completely honest with you here. I haven't actually seen a lot of Batman movies. I have seen the DCEU version of him. I've obviously seen this trilogy. Apart from that, I haven't really seen a lot of Batman movies. However, it would be really hard to top this one. I don't think that any of the other movies, if I ever do get around to watching them, can top this one. Plus, I hear that Batman Forever and Batman and Robin are terrible. The Dark Knight is an amazing movie, and I think that the main reason why it's so good is because in reality, it's not necessarily a Batman movie. It's more like a Gotham City movie. It seems like the entire movie, the focus isn't specifically put on Batman. It is put on just the city as a whole. And I think that that was a really good decision. Since the focus isn't specifically on Batman, I do think that Bruce doesn't really get a lot of development in this movie, which is okay, because I don't necessarily think he needed to. He gets a lot of development in Batman Begins and in The Dark Knight Rises, but in this movie, he kind of feels like a side character to me. I feel like he shouldn't have been pushed back from the spotlight to that degree, so that's just a small complaint that I have with this movie. Besides that, though, this is basically a masterpiece. One of the main things that everybody likes about this movie is Joker. The Joker in this movie is terrifying. I can see why everybody likes this version. He just seems like the character. He is unpredictable, completely insane. The character is portrayed perfectly in this movie, and that performance is one of the main things that everybody loves about this movie, and a lot of people say that it's the best thing about this movie. I would probably have to agree. I would say, yeah, the Joker in this movie is probably the best thing about it. I also like the other main villain in this movie, Two-Face, because I think that Harvey, his character arc, is great in this movie. He starts out as Gotham's, like, white knight who, like, everybody looks up to, and then he becomes a villain through the Joker's manipulation, and I think that that was done really well for the story that they were trying to tell. It's a movie that I think is amazing. Honestly, I feel like everybody thinks that this movie is amazing. It brings up so many compelling themes. It has great villains, great performances, as I just said, and they made the movie about Gotham, and I think that that was a great idea for the second movie in this trilogy. Yeah, I think that the first two movies are really, really good. So now we're going to get into the third movie. The Dark Knight Rises is very underrated. So many people say that this movie is just nothing compared to Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, that it's just an afterthought. Yes, it isn't as good as The Dark Knight or Batman Begins, but that doesn't make this movie an afterthought. I think that this movie is still really good, even though it might not be as good. First off, I'm going to start off with the complaint that everybody has that has kind of become a joke at this point. The fact that you can't understand anything Bane is saying in this entire movie. Gotham's reckoning, and you can't understand anything he is saying. That's a bit distracting, I have to admit. I'm just going to push that complaint away now. I just had to say that. Now we're going to get into actually talking about the movie. I think that this is probably the movie in the trilogy. Probably people will think that Batman Begins develops Batman better, but I think that The Dark Knight Rises is probably the best movie in terms of developing Bruce. I know that that's kind of a controversial opinion, but I still think that it develops Bruce better than Batman Begins did, and definitely better than The Dark Knight did, because as I said, the main focus wasn't even on Bruce. The small character arc that Bruce did have in Dark Knight, this movie picks up on that, and both of these movies are basically about Bruce trying to leave Batman behind, realizing that the city really doesn't need him. And I think that that's a great character arc for him to have, and I think it's pulled off very well in this movie, and it is pulled off well in The Dark Knight too. It's just not front and center. So I think that this movie completed Bruce's character arc throughout the three movies very well, and the ending, when he sacrifices himself, I teared up at the part where he was saying goodbye to Gordon. Specifically, I thought that that was a very emotional scene, and I think it just sent off the trilogy really well. Then I also really like the chemistry that Bruce has with Selina Kyle, or Catwoman. Catwoman isn't necessarily a villain in this movie, so I'm not going to count her as one. I actually meant somebody else when I said that each movie has two main villains. Most people will say that in this movie it's Bane and Catwoman, but I disagree. I think that Catwoman isn't really a villain, because she has kind of a redemptive arc throughout the movie, and I think that that was really well done. But the main two villains in the movie are Bane and Talia al Ghul, Ra's al Ghul's daughter. So I'm going to start with Bane. I honestly don't understand a lot of Bane's motivations in this movie. Like, I would say that Ra's al Ghul, Joker, and Two-Face are really just the really, really good villains in this trilogy. And then as for Bane, he's close to that list because he's a threat throughout the movie, but I just don't find him as interesting as the other three villains because his motivations aren't clear. With Ra's al Ghul, his motivations are clear. He's trying to wipe out a city that he sees as corrupt. With Joker, his motivations are clear. He's trying to show the world that everybody is as insane as he is. With the Two-Face, his motivations are clear. He's trying to avenge Rachel. All three of those characters, their motivations are clear. I just don't see what Bane's motivations are. So that's kind of a small problem that I have with this movie. The biggest problem that I have with this movie is its other villain, Talia al Ghul. She's a twist villain in the movie. On the bright side, I didn't see the twist coming, but on the dark side, that's probably because there really wasn't a lot of build-up to it, and she wasn't really shown off as a prominent character that you should care about anyway. So I just thought when I was watching this, well, that kind of came out of nowhere. I would probably say that Talia is the second worst villain, because you can kind of see her motivations. With Scarecrow, you can't see them at all, but I still think that Bane should have been the main villain instead of her being the twist main villain, because I just think that Bane was a better villain. Overall, I think Batman Begins is a great origin story. I think that The Dark Knight is an amazing Batman movie because the focus isn't specifically on Batman. And I think that The Dark Knight Rises is very underrated. So that's basically all I really have to say. Now, I'm thinking about possibly making this thing where I review a whole trilogy, like a series on my channel where I do this like every month. So that's possibly going to happen. We'll see. So I guess that's really it for the video. So if you like the video, then like the video and subscribe, and see ya, movie fans.